This
portfolio management
conference will
services
now be recorded.
to financial advisors, and I will be your moderator today. Cheryl, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Cheryl Holland, founder of Abacus Planning Group, and I would just put my tagline as a loud and proud fiduciary. And we do holistic financial planning primarily for families who have family businesses.
Great. Clark?
Yeah, hi. I'm Clark Blackman. I'm founder of Alpha Wealth Strategies in Houston. It's a very small RIA investment consulting firm with 32 families that we give advice to.
Okay, great. Well, today I think the title of our presentation today is Too Much Sales or Too Much Fiduciary? And really the premise underlying that is based on an observation that I will make, and we'll see if Cheryl and Clark agree or disagree, that there is a lot of publicity and a lot of forces in our industry, I think, that are driving advisors to focus on the sales side of their business, on growing and becoming more profitable. And my observation is that there are very few people who are, James, hello there.
Hello there.
We'll let you introduce yourself in just a minute, James. Yeah, very few people who are sort of banging the drum, Canute being one of the notable exceptions, about the fiduciary responsibilities that advisors have and the more fundamental ethical principles that underlie our business. And so it seemed like this would be a good opportunity for us to take a look at that question and just examine it a little more closely, see whether my observation is generally shared by this group or whether there are some different viewpoints represented here. And so we'll get started with that in just a minute. I'll be asking the panelists some questions, but I wanted to let James introduce himself now that it managed to join us. Sorry for the technical difficulties again, but James, fire away.
My apologies, Scott, and the rest of the panelists. It's probably user error, so I apologize. So I'm James Lee. I am president of Registered Investment Advisor in Saratoga Springs, New York. I've been operating as a independent fee-only RIA since the very beginning, and I'm currently serving as president of the board of the Financial Planning Association.
Okay, very good. Well, let's just start off with a very basic question, which is, what is a fiduciary? And again, I'm not looking for a legal definition here, but what does it mean to you panelists to be a fiduciary? How do you view that as part of your responsibility, and how do you think about that in interacting with your clients? Cheryl, do you want to start?
Oh, Clark, I'll toss you the baton. You go.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, isn't this about how do you behave like a fiduciary? We're not going to talk about the legal aspects of it. It's the relationship aspect of it, right? And what does it mean then to be a fiduciary? And different types of fiduciaries, but in the context of what we're talking about, I think it would be like treating your client like they were your grandmother, whose assets you were going to inherit, right? You wouldn't do anything in that relationship that wasn't absolutely the right thing to do by that person. It's the golden rule: do unto others as you would do unto yourself, right? That's fiduciary behavior. So I think in the simplest terms, that's what it's about.
Scott, I'll just piggyback on that to say I try to think about every conversation, every decision process, every long-term plan with the client that I'm standing in their shoes. To strip myself of my values and my objectives and think, if I were that individual, what's the best recommendation? What's the best process for making a decision? What's the best outcome, short-term and long-term, for them? Forget Cheryl, forget Abacus. It's all about them.
I agree with those sentiments. Every day when I wake up, I think about how I can help my client. that's at the forefront of my mind. This is a helping profession, financial planning, and every day we get up with the privilege and the responsibility of helping our clients with the most important decisions that they make surrounding money. And I take that responsibility very, very, that weighs very heavily on me. And so that's what it means to me to wake up just thinking about how can I help my clients.
Yeah. If I was going to make an observation about the answers that all of you gave, and it's the same way I view it, it's a state of mind really, rather than a set of rules or some legal obligation that you have to memorize and follow the certain set of rules. It always makes me a little nervous when I see people talking about the legal boundaries of fiduciary responsibility, because I think you're talking about somebody who's not really thinking about things as a fiduciary. That it really is more of a state of mind, how you approach clients every day. Yeah, and just kind of a follow-on question to that: how do your clients understand what a fiduciary is? I know there's a lot of people say fiduciary doesn't matter anymore, or clients don't really know what that is. How do your clients relate to that concept?
Well, the first thing that
Well,
comes to my mind is exactly what you just said. They know we live and breathe that. They couldn't tell you probably what fiduciary really means. They know some of them to put their interests ahead of mine, because I might joke and say, I want you to pay off your mortgage right now, given where the interest rates are. And let me tell you, I'm going to make less money if you do it. And we all laugh, right? It's such a good
Hmm.
idea that I'm going to make less money. But I also think that clients see it, know it when they see it. They feel it in everything, especially when you make a mistake, when it's something that costs you trust, or anything where you have a loss, and they see you handle that beautifully because they come first. So they see it. They might not know the definition, but they see it. They recognize it, just like you said. They see it as a way of being in the world.
Yeah.
right, right. And I think that the big issue here is they may or may not know what a fiduciary is or how to define it, but it's a behavior they expect. They're paying somebody for advice. They're expecting someone to act like a fiduciary, whether they know the word or not. And therein lies part of the problem. Uh, when you're not a fiduciary and you're believed to be a fiduciary, then that's a prescription for trouble, because there's a level of trust there that maybe isn't deserved or warranted. And yet there it is. And quite frankly, if you tell an individual, anybody, just try to explain to them this industry and how some advisors are fiduciaries and some advisors are not fiduciaries, and here's what that means, they do not believe you. It is not possible in their minds that regulators would allow people who call themselves the same thing, hold them to different levels of behavior. It's, and I've had those conversations,
Hmm.
and it is like I must be lying to them. It can't be true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Canute, if I recall some of the comments you've made in the past, you said maybe 7% of financial advisors are actually true fiduciaries, something like that. So that's a huge, so the fiduciary world is just the tip of the financial advisor iceberg, and there's a vast number of financial advisors who may try to cloak themselves in that standard, but really don't have to live up to it.
Yeah. So again, I think that in this day and age where there's so much distrust in institutions, going from our political institutions to business institutions, it's really important that we as financial planners, as advisors who act in a fiduciary manner, let the world know about that. And our clients who, Clark, as you said, they come in expecting competence and ethical behavior from their advisors. They often, unfortunately don't often receive that. It's up to us to work with our clients in their best interest to set examples and to lead this profession into the future. I am interested in that 7% figure that Canute cites. I was recently at a FPA meeting, and Cerulli was giving a presentation, and their statistics show that from the asset level, um, those assets that are held by in a fiduciary manner are now 55% of the advisory assets. That compares to 36% in 2012. So I do think that both clients and the industry or profession are recognizing the importance of fiduciary, and it's winning in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a very interesting equation, though, because I agree with the general sentiment that I've heard here so far, which is the clients don't really understand the regulatory landscape that we operate under, and who could blame them? It's very confusing, even if we looked at it from the purely statutory point of view. But now it's become even more confusing with things like Reg BI and some of the positions that the SEC has taken. It just becomes extremely difficult. And yet, somehow or another, the clients do seem to be gravitating in the direction of fiduciary advisors. I wonder how they're doing that. Are they just kind of sensing the types of people that they want to work with, or are they really relating to this fiduciary term? How do you think that's happening?
I'm probably a little more pessimistic than the conversation's going. I still sense that the word fiduciary has resonance in the marketplace, but it's being abused and misused in ways that are confusing to the public. So they may be attracted to it, but are they ending up in the right place because of that? Because of the mixed messaging that the SEC, I think, is allowing and the broker dealers are encouraging. And I want to stop right here and say a big footnote. I think there are many ethical people who are not fiduciaries, and I want to make that loud and clear. But I do think fiduciary is a different way of, giving advice. But I would say that um, I'm not sure we're winning the war. We might be winning some battles, but I still worry about the war.
Yeah, well, this is another question: is has that term been co-opted? I think you see fiduciary uh, thrown around by firms, whether they're insurance-related firms um, or large brokerage firms. Somehow that word pops up in the conversation, and you have a sense that it's not actually applicable to the things they're talking about. Does it become more of a marketing term, do you think, than a real label?
Absolutely think that's become a marketing term. And can you just put in the chat, how do you help clients tell the difference? And I'll give you what I think is a perfect example. A lot of my clients come in and say, you recommended a Social Security claiming strategy that has us waiting till we're 70 to claim our Social Security, as an example. And all of our friends are being told to take it earlier. And I'm saying, and I use that as an example. I say, well, let me, as a fiduciary, I have to have your best interest at heart. I don't know that other person's back system, but my guess is that the other advisor knows that they'll be taking money out of the portfolio at a more aggressive rate if they delay taking the Social Security until they're 70. And they're thinking short term and in their own interest, possibly. Whereas yes, I may make less money in the short term, but you're going to have more wealth in the long term if we take this strategy. So I try to seed in examples that resonate in the moment, but it's very difficult to have that conversation with an inquiry, without, to explain the difference, in my opinion. I think you can ask questions. Scott, your article, you wrote, saying does that beautifully. We always ask them, what are the characteristics and values you're looking for in your financial advisor? So you can ask them to opine and reflect and then tie the dots. But it's very difficult to give examples when they're not really asking for that information in the inquiry meeting for us. So I'd be curious, Clark, what you're experiencing, and James, you too, in, communicating to a client or a possible client how you're different?
Right. Well, we don't do a lot of marketing, and we make it as clear as possible up front. First of all, that our approach is very consultative. So that means part of our goal is to educate clients so that they understand decisions that are being made and engage them as much as possible in those decisions. And so, through that process, they begin to get the picture that we're not just going to tell them what to do, or we're not just going to make a recommendation without a thorough explanation, that they can understand as to why they would do that. All right. Then they can get a sense of how we're different, because we're not going to just sell them on an idea or sell them on a product or get them something that they don't completely understand. Now, our business model is such that that works for us. We don't have hundreds of clients. Our minimum is $3 million. We can take the time in multiple meetings to engage clients in the education process, and clients that aren't interested in that, quite frankly, don't become clients. They see that that's how we operate, more like an institutional consultant. So for us, I think it's straightforward enough without getting into the nitty gritty of how we're fiduciaries and they're not fiduciaries, and they're going to sell you stuff, and because that all sounds a little self-serving as well. And some of them are working with a really good salesperson that they love, or at least like a lot, because they're good salespeople. So, everybody has to kind of make their own decision about how they're going to approach that with a potential client. But obviously, once a potential client becomes a client, and notice that I don't call them prospects. That's the term for the other side of the business. We have potential clients. We don't build a book of business, right? We just have clients. And so once they're onboarded, they get it, and they see that difference, and they enjoy being engaged and knowing what they're investing in and why they're investing in it. So that's our approach.
What about you, James?
Yes, so it is interesting to note that the term fiduciary, it is a legal term in some ways, and it is confusing to consumers because there are various definitions of fiduciary that are applied by different regulatory bodies, different certifying bodies, etc. So the SEC has one definition of fiduciary, the Department of Labor has another. And of course, the CFP board has its own definition of fiduciary. So yes, it is confusing to clients. Ultimately, it's the relationship, how the financial planner works with the client, that puts the client at the center of the relationship, that makes it truly fiduciary, regardless of what the regulatory or standard setting body says it is. I can say that when I began my practice 25 years ago, almost no one asked me if I was a fiduciary. These days, I would say it's close. It's over 50% of potential clients come in and ask if I act as a fiduciary. That is promising. That means that the term fiduciary is being is being recognized in the marketplace by consumers as the type of advisor that you want to work with, someone who has an obligation, either under the law or under the standards that they commit to act as a fiduciary, meaning with a duty of loyalty and a duty of care to the client. So I do see that term fiduciary being more well recognized, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the CFP the CFP board and the number of people coming through the CFP programs at colleges and getting the CFP designation is having an impact on the recognition of how important it is to be a fiduciary when you're working with a financial planner or a financial advisor.
Okay. So how would you describe the difference between a fiduciary? I think you've all described how you see being a fiduciary, but how would you describe the difference between your approach and what advisors who are not fiduciaries do? I mean, what are the differences there?
Well, there's many, but I would say three come immediately to mind. One, there's never a product, that we're representing in any way, shape, or form. We are indifferent to where a client custodies assets, invests assets, spends their dollars at whatever rate, as long as it's consistent with their values as goals as we set out together. So we don't spend a lot of time learning about that, even so we're freed up to learn more technical issues. I think the second piece is that we this may not be fiduciary, but to me this is fiduciary. We think about the client holistically, so we're thinking about the whole person and not just their wealth, and they're managing their money, but how does that work as a part of who they are and the systems and values they live in? To me, that's a very important part. And then three, that we're direct and honest about the places that we do have conflicts of interest, because they are going to exist. I might be coaching a client to sell their business, and I need to be confident that it's the best thing for them to do and not maintain it and do a variety of other things. And then I have to say to them, I'm giving you this advice, but you need to know if we liquidate the business, I will be making X more per year for the rest of your lives. So to me, those are three things that come immediately to mind that I think a fiduciary does that is unique.
James, Clark?
Well, again, I think most people understand how compensation affects behavior. And I think it's a matter of just making it crystal clear that in this business, I think some of the statistics are a little frightening, but in this business, many advisors make money many different ways. And we make money one way, and that is you pay us. That is our only source of income. We're loyal to you and to no other. You are our livelihood. And that's not true in actually, sadly, a majority of cases, a vast majority of cases. Your advisor is going to make money a number of ways off of you and your assets. And they get that, and they understand that if somebody is making money on their assets or their decisions beyond what fee they're paying, that clearly there's an incentive to do things that may not be in their own best interest. And so, I think it's just that simple matter of them knowing how you're compensated versus how others are.
James?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, so it's hard for me to put myself in the shoe of someone who's not a fiduciary and working with a client, but I think all of us have met prospective clients who've come in and showed us their account statements and talked about the relationship or non-relationship that they had with their previous advisor, and the differences are stark between those who truly are acting in the best interest of their client, and those who are not. When you do see them side by side, it's very very easy to see the difference.
Yeah, we see that a lot from where we sit. We will work with hundreds of advisors, and they bring the accounts to us, their clients' accounts from wirehouses or wherever, and it's just staggering to look at the mess that's created by some of those firms. and you can pretty much figure that you can follow the money back to how it got that way. It really is driven by the
And Scott, I want to shout
yeah.
out a positive trend kind of going back. Are we going the right direction? And this is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely proof that, you know, remember, I can remember a decade ago and certainly 20 years ago when every client walked in their 401k and their 401k options were a mess
Yeah.
and horrible choices. It was like, wow, you need to have this money in the 401k, but it's not good. It's ugly in there. And yet over the past 20 years, I can't remember the last time that was true. People walk in their door with low cost, strong, thoughtful options for their 401k. So there is a huge sea change in that landscape. So I would just say there's an example of a place where things have improved dramatically over my professional lifetime. So I agree, we still see mess, but we don't see that mess.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the
Sure, some
conflicts.
still exist, but I don't see them.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just talk a little bit about the conflicts of interest because I heard the difference involving fiduciaries and non-fiduciaries is in part conflicts of interest, and I would again I'd just make the observation that it's not just the fact that non-fiduciaries are making money, but it's their job to make money off the client. That is actually they get in trouble or lose their job if they don't make enough money off the client. It's not just that they have the conflicts, but they're encouraged to pursue those. Let's talk a little bit about the conflicts of interest that you have as fiduciaries. Cheryl, you referred to it a little while ago, but there are conflicts. You can't unless you're providing your services for free, right? It's impossible to avoid all conflicts of interest, right? How do you deal with the Knut's not agreeing with me. Okay, you need to get your audio back in shape, Knut. So, um,
Chat at us.
but
Shout out
yeah,
to chat.
yeah. But how do you deal with the conflicts that you have? And how would you identify them? What are they? And how do you disclose those to your clients?
We actually have a list of potential conflicts in our ADV. And where we have conflict is going back to one of the things Cheryl mentioned is making decisions that are going to require assets to fulfill those goals. Paying off the mortgage is one example. So we take a consultative approach, so we're not telling clients what to do. We're telling them what to think about, what to consider. And especially for a client who really has a desire to pay off that mortgage. Well, you know what? You can afford to pay off that mortgage, pay it off. It doesn't matter what the numbers say, right? Yeah. You pay it off, let's get it paid off. You can afford to do that and still have a great retirement. It's not a financial decision for you, it's an emotional decision. And there are lots of things like that. But again, bottom line is we make it clear up front. I mean, to the point where clients now laugh at me. You understand, of course, we have a conflict of interest here. If you do this, we'll make more money, we'll make less money. But here's what you need to think about. And we'll help you through that process and give you information. And that works very well. I mean, our clients don't have any real issues with the way we bill. And in fact, our largest client some years ago, I asked him if he'd like to go on a fixed fee. He said, no way. I want you to make more money when I make more money and less money when I make less money.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite a while ago, but there's that mindset. And I think as long as you're crystal clear and transparent about how your fee gets calculated, it's basically a fixed fee, right? You're just fixing it every quarter. And as long as the client understands that and knows how it works, and gets this idea that the more money you have of theirs, the more money you're going to make, that's a conflict that really, there's other aspects to that too. And I'm basically coming at this from a person who is primarily an investment advisor. And then we do some planning along the side. We don't do comprehensive plans, or we don't hold ourselves out as financial planners who maybe do a little investment stuff. You could get into those conversations where you might think, maybe AUM isn't the most appropriate way, but that's a conversation for tomorrow's call, where we're gonna discuss all those issues of AUM. But the conflicts definitely exist. We just have to recognize them and help our clients work through that.
How do you deal with those, James?
Yeah, so as Cheryl mentioned, anytime you make a recommendation that would leave more assets in a portfolio where potentially you would be have greater compensation if you're a AUM advisor, for example, does create a conflict of interest. But I think what we talked about before is coming to each engagement with the primary goal of helping the client make the right decision for them. What gives them peace of mind? What gives them the um, the time or the emotional uh, okay to make a decision that might not be in their best financial interest? That's the recommendation that I'll make to the client. What is best for them? And if you come into each engagement, each recommendation with that, then you are acting as a fiduciary and acting in the client's best interest.
Yeah.
You know, Scott,
Do
we've
you,
been talking about
yeah.
financial transactions, but I think another important thing about a good fiduciary is we're sensitive to relational issues. So, for example, you know, Clark rightly mentioned a grandmother, but you know, there could be a conflict between what the grandmother wants to do for the grandchild and the child. There could be a conflict between siblings who are both clients that are tussling over a property. So again, you know, just disclosing that where the limitations might be. So maybe it's not a conflict of interest per se, but it's so borderline because it's a limitation on what you may be able to do. I think you owe that to your client as a fiduciary. So it's not just transactional, it can be, you know, system or um, you know, or just, you know, that I can see in some estate planning attorneys, they have a very tight relationship with a life insurance agent. I don't, to me, that's a fiduciary slip, right? When you have one person you refer to, unless you have good reason for that. So there are relational and dynamic and systems issues that can also be conflicts of interest in my mind as a fiduciary.
It sounds like you're handling the conflicts that come from fee structures pretty well. Do you think the emergence of flat fees and subscription fees and so forth these days is a response to this perceived conflict about the AUM fee structure?
Well, we've always charged a flat fee and an AUM, so I don't see a distinction there for
Okay.
us. I'm not sure I understand subscription and how that's different than an AUM. You're just deducting it from a different pool and a different calculation, and it's sort of software based for a younger generation. So again, that's for another day.
Right.
I think this healthy, important conversation that we're all having to, like, you know, reflect on our own strategy to make sure it's in the client's best interest. I don't know the right answer here.
Yeah. Now I've heard primarily advisors from brokerage firms talk about commission-based sales as sometimes being in the client's best interest. In other words, commission isn't per se um, inconsistent with fiduciary standards. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well,
I mean,
I
I
don't.
guess the question is it possible to be compensated for the sale of a product and not have some sort of a fiduciary issue?
Well, I think there's absolutely a place for commission sales. It's not about fiduciary duty at all. It's about providing a service to a customer who knows what he or she is getting, which is a product, which is a transaction, which is a relationship based on things that they do. I have absolutely no beef at all with the brokerage industry and brokers providing services to their clientele, their customer base. The issue is when they present themselves as advisors, when they're less about advice and more about what can I sell you? What do you need? How can I help you with a transaction? There's a lot of people out there that just want transaction help. They're their own advisor. That's great. They need that access to that side of the business. It's hard to argue against that. It's all about who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with a salesperson who's going to do something for me or convince me, sell me on a new idea or new product? Or am I talking to an advisor who has my best interest in it? And if I don't buy anything, it doesn't matter to them one way or the other. And yet, this has gotten very confused and confusing for the marketplace out there. That's the problem.
Yeah. James or Cheryl, do you have anything to say on that?
Well, I think historically there has been an argument that for some size accounts, a commission is a better outcome for them financially than an AUM, et cetera. Um, I think I would go back to my initial statement. We're talking about being a fiduciary, which is different than perhaps than being ethical. So I think I would say you can certainly be an ethical person and charge a transaction, a commission. It's sort of like what Clark was saying. It's your service, it's your business. Everyone knows what's going on, but you're not a fiduciary.
Right. Yeah. It used to be very clear. Well, I'm not sure how clear it was really, but certainly in the statute, if you look at the Investment Advisors Act, there's something called a broker dealer and or a broker, and there's something called an advisor, and the standards applicable to those two have been very clear for decades and decades. And now all of a sudden it seems that they've gotten far less clear. How did that happen? It seems like the SEC, who's charged with keeping the distinctions clear, has not just fallen down on the job, but actually seems to be participating in the confusion. Any observations on whether that's true or why it might be true? What's going on there?
It's my understanding they made a conscious decision in the late 90s to allow brokers to call themselves advisors. And if Knut could, if Mike worked, he could pitch in. And I mean, there have over the years been those within the SEC who basically admitted that, and the hope was that, well, if they can call themselves advisors, maybe they'll act like advisors. Ridiculous as that. But they allowed that to happen because the whole idea of special compensation, et cetera, is obviously if you hold yourself out as an advisor, you should be registered as an advisor. And they let that go for the longest time, and it took a lawsuit to get them to change that.
Yeah, so I think advice was allowed to be delivered by brokers under the solely incidental rule. That advice was solely incidental to the investment that they were uh, recommending to their clients. And I think you're right. It has been muddied. The best interest regulation, just even the terminology best interest, many people equate best interest with fiduciary, and that's confusing in and of itself. Um, like Clark, I also am a believer that there is a place in financial services for brokerage business, and there is a place for advice, the advice model. And they should be distinct and clear to the practitioners and to consumers. And unfortunately, that's not the case today. So we, as practitioners, our industry associations really need to work on making sure that there's clarity in the marketplace on who is actually acting as a fiduciary, who's behaving as a fiduciary, and who's not.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
I'm completely befuddled why it has taken such a sharp left turn
yeah.
away from true north. And so I don't have an answer, Scott. I think you summarized it beautifully, the three of you. And sometimes I'm not even sure that they're aware of the consequences of this decision for the consumer that they're
Yeah,
to be protecting.
yeah.
I mean, who
It
are they
seems
protecting?
like, yeah, it just seems like a major cultural shift there. I mean, I started my career back when I was in law school. I was an intern at the SEC in the Division of Investment Management Regulation, and it was very clear to everybody there, even to the interns, who we were there to protect and how we were supposed to go about doing that. And the consumer was the primary focus of our activity, was protecting end investors, and that just seems to have just been obliterated, that idea at this point. And I'm just befuddled. I mean, to the point where the SEC is forbidding advisors to use the term fiduciary in their form CRS. It's like, that's just like it's head shaking to me. I don't understand it.
Telehead checking. And what's fascinating to me, Scott, is, when you read, I know this from being on the NAPFA public policy committee for a while. When you look at the surveys, it's a very bipartisan interest in protecting the consumer from, bad practices in the financial services
Yeah,
industry writ large, broader than what we were talking about. And so I just don't, I mean, we could hypothesize all day long, but I don't think it's strictly a political issue. And I just think it's a culture shift, and why it came about, we may be dead and gone long before this book written about it.
yeah,
That it's not good is the bottom line for the consumer.
yeah. Well, do you think the industry groups like the FPA and CFP board and others, obviously the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard is doing all they can do to make this clear to consumers, but are the other industry groups pitching in to try to help fill in where the SEC seems to have fallen short?
Well, I can certainly tell you from the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, top of our list of, what we consider key, many other things too, but that is very key. The FPA, I can't talk to that, but I think they're now thinking, let's go state by state to just find what is an advisor and see if we can get, better outcomes there. I'm not saying that very well. So I think we're all in alignment on this issue in many ways. But I do think that the broader the tent, the more complicated this can be in how they care and move the needle on the fiduciary issue.
Yeah, so at FPA, last year, the board announced a long-term goal of recognizing the term financial planner in regulations. That's been a long-held goal by many in the financial planning profession. And of course, the term financial planner would be, if successful, would be regulated under a fiduciary standard. So there would be a person who holds the title financial planner who unambiguously would be acting as a fiduciary. Unlike today, where you have financial advisor, wealth manager, even financial planner, where you may or may not have to work under a fiduciary standard. So that is one initiative that FPA is undergoing. That's a long-term initiative, but ultimately will benefit the public and society as a whole.
Any comments on the Massachusetts court's ruling in the Robin Hood case? I know there was a whole webinar on that yesterday, I think. Um, is that encouraging? Are the states going to take up the cause and do something meaningful in this area?
I would not handicap that, Scott, being a Southerner. I don't
Yeah,
think it's high on our agenda.
that may be
I
an
would just,
outlier. Yeah,
I would not put that as high on our legislative agenda. But could we make it so? I think that's an interesting question.
yeah,
Yeah, I think some of the activity in the states, certainly in Massachusetts and in other states, is moving the needle on this issue of fiduciary. Um, of, co- uh, of course, at FPA, we do ideally would like a national standard to apply to all financial planners and not have a state by state piecemeal type of regulation for financial planners. But the in reality, most professions are regulated at the state level, and that's something that we are examining right now as an organization on what's the best direction to go in that respect.
Let's circle back to the comment I made at the beginning of this webinar about the sales culture being alive and well in the financial services industry. Do you see that as a strong current that's moving the industry in the direction that it's going now, or do you find that that's kind of more in the press, but the advisors day to day are pretty grounded in the fiduciary principles? I just personally worry about the fact that um, every time I read a lot of industry publications and they're all about so and so got acquired and so came out with a new product and here's 14 consultants who can teach you how to grow your business overnight, and the emphasis is so much on growth and profitability and product sales that again, maybe I'm old school, but it just seems like the forces of, I'll call it, be dramatic and say the forces of evil are sort of moving the needle in the wrong direction, and that there are very few voices that are saying, hey, let's think about this. Let's talk about what this means. What's the cost of this kind of thinking? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I
I
do.
think that's
So
what
I'm. Go ahead, Cheryl.
James, you, no, but James, please.
Okay.
I would love to follow you.
All right. I'm more optimistic, Scott.
Yeah.
I've been traveling around the country to local FPA chapters and talking with our members, some of who come from the brokerage channel. And what I am hearing is that the wirehouses are embracing the CFP designation for their employees. And of course, if you're a CFP, you commit to a fiduciary standard of care when providing financial advice. So that is moving the needle in the right direction. The other thing I'm hearing, which is encouraging, is that the large firms are also subsidizing their advisors to work with clients who do not have wealth yet. With younger clients, and that is also encouraging because we need uh, people who have been traditionally underserved by financial services, meaning those who have not been able to accumulate any investable assets yet, to get good advice on their money decisions, big and small. So I do see positive trends out there, Scott. That's what I'm
Mhm.
observing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would just add, and James has a very unique and helpful position on these issues. I would just add that, from my perspective, it's one reason we're a member of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard, because we think it's important and there's not enough information out there. The standards, all the ways that Knut and his leadership is making a difference. But I will tell you, I think if you walked around the office and you asked my advisors about fiduciary, the knowledge is very uneven, even in an organization that cares. So I do think we have a long ways to go. And I do think people are caring more about how do I build all I have to build, not even just know, they have to build their technical skills, right? They have to build their soft skills. They have to build their own lives outside. There's just a lot to pay attention to.
Right.
So how do we keep this front and center is a challenge. And you can do it through role modeling and discussions, but there's not a lot out there for me to go get off the shelf and say to a group of young advisors, hey, until recently, hey, how do you learn how to be a fiduciary? It's just one of many things that they're being asked to do.
Yeah. Another trend that I've noticed is, I think we've all read about the emergence of the mega firms, private equity coming in and getting involved in buying up advisory practices. And to me, it looks a little bit like sort of recreation of wirehouse-like organizations, where the the driving forces may be something other than just serving clients in the best possible way. Um, do you worry at all about that trend in our industry? Does that scare you a little? The idea that private equity may be sort of pushing the needle again in the wrong direction.
Yeah,
Another way to put that is,
I do.
if you were running a large mega firm, is there a tension between your master at the private equity firm, or whatever money is behind your firm, and the service of clients?
Yeah, I think anytime profitability and growth becomes the goal for an organization, I don't care who the organization is. I'll cite Arthur Anderson for my work for many, many years ago. When profitability and growth becomes the key and the goal for people in that firm, that's where the emphasis is. I mean, I created my firm to get out of that always have to be marketing, always have to be moving to the next level of profitability, because it does lead to some bad decision making when it relates to clients. I'll give a very simple example. If you're always marketing, you're always needing to show that the portfolios you have, the funds you use, the managers you use are what? In the top quartile for 3 and 5 years, 1, 3, and 5 years. And how do you do that? You don't do that by keeping it stable for years and years. You do that by constantly changing your funds and your managers,
Right.
so that you can show the prospect a great set of funds and managers. They don't know any better. All they see is numbers, and that's great. It's a difficult sell when you don't have that. But if you're not caring that much about selling, if you're just doing what's in the best interest of your client, and you have to show a potential client, a manager that doesn't have a great 3 or 5 year record, explain to them why that is and why that's still a great manager. You go through that effort. I can tell you, a selling organization doesn't want to mess with that, nor do the sales guys who are bringing in the new clients. They got to see top quartile funds and managers for as many trailing periods as you can come up with. That's just one example of how that motivation changes your behavior with your clients.
And I'll just say it's, and I think it behooves us to pay attention to any kind of trend that has an impact to warm the ocean, so to say, that we're living
Hmm.
in. But I do know that we're still growing the number of RIAs out there. So there's still more people forming new RIAs, even though we're taking RIAs out of the system. So that
Hmm.
says something to me too, that people still want to do it, the right way, the RIA way. But I do think it bears witness to, and I'm sure each organization will be different. But as Clark says, it's more difficult to have a fiduciary standard, the grander the scheme and the source of the money, potentially. But there's many ways that this could be a win for us. Maybe they're big enough to actually be a lobbying effort worthy of competition with those who are lobbying for a different way of thinking about the fiduciary standard. So there could be positives from this too.
Yeah. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I this is very interesting, and I think that it's an interesting topic. And going back to the Cerulli data that I saw, the independent RIA and hybrid RIA channels are actually growing faster than any of the other channels, like wirehouses, independent broker dealers, banks, etc. In many ways, I think that's a sign that advisors are looking to work in a fiduciary, fee-based environment. Again, that makes me optimistic about the future of financial advice and how ultimately clients will be served by our profession writ large.
Well,
Could
I
I,
am. Yeah, go ahead, Clark.
could I, yeah. So I love the optimism. I like and agree with the fact that small advisors keep coming on board. And small firms are obviously the vast majority of firms today. I look back when I started my firm, and of course the biggest issue I faced was concerns about regulatory exams and following the rules. Seeing what's coming out of Washington now in the past year and a half, I hope every advisor listening to this is paying attention to proposed rules coming out of Washington. The day is coming where it will not be possible to start a small firm. You will not have the resources, the capacity to meet all of what's coming out of Washington right now to start a small firm. You're going to start big because you're going to need to have the resources to have a full-time compliance staff to meet all the requirements today. I have real concerns about that because I do think that the small firm does provide that level of high touch, competent advice that people are looking for. So I want to put that out there. I want people listening to pay attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C. Good regulation, extraordinarily important to all of us. We don't want another Bernie Madoff. That would literally destroy small firms, but it reaches a point where it's counterproductive. We're getting to that point, and small firms are going to have a really hard time dealing with absorbing all these new rules.
Yeah. Well, so add on the optimistic side of the equation here, I'm actually at the XY Planning Conference here in Atlanta today, and I've spoken to dozens of advisors who are coming into the business. They're very enthusiastic. They're very focused on serving clients and could care less about a lot of the sort of profit-driven, growth-driven motivations that some people might have. This is it's such an uplifting experience to be here and to see the enthusiasm and the energy. And a lot of them are new, and they're just coming into the business, or they just left a big firm and they're trying to start kind of adding to the statistics that you were mentioning too, James. So it's been very encouraging. Just on a final note, I know we're running out of time here. Just wanted to ask each of you for your predictions on the state of the fiduciary standard 10 years from now. So will it be a strong force in our industry? Is it going to disappear entirely? Is it going to be about where it is today? What do you think?
I'm going to vote strong force. I think that just for the same reason that fee only grew so vastly over time, it's driven by consumer demand. At the end of the day, people want a trusted advisor, and it's easiest to trust someone that you know as a fiduciary. So I think it'll be demand driven, and therefore the supply will rise to meet the demand.
Yeah,
James?
and I agree. And I think when we're seeing advertisements like Future Investments talking about fiduciary and trying to get people to understand what fiduciary means, that kind of advertising goes a long way. And they may not go to Kingfisher, but that's what's driving a lot of these questions, Cheryl and James, when they come to you. Are you a fiduciary? Well, advertising works miracles. I'm very positive, optimistic and positive about the future of fiduciary duty and fee only and all that, because it is what clients want. It's what they expect.
James?
I agree with that. In 10 years, it will be the minimum ethical standard that consumers will demand when they are meeting with a financial planner or financial advisor.
Yeah. It won't be a beautiful, clean process, but that's the direction I think things are going to go. Yeah.
Oh, come on. Of course it will.
There's just like everything else. There are countervailing forces at work, but ultimately, I think the fiduciary standard will prevail. Okay, so I think let's call it a wrap at this point. Thank you very much, Cheryl, James, and Clark, and Canute. Although we only got the visuals on you, thank you very much to everybody who was here with us today. We really appreciate the time, and thanks for your insights, everyone.
Scott.